Hey everyone, thank you for coming to MEV Day and for coming to this talk, for your time and for your interest. I'm going to talk briefly about why the multi-chain world is centralized. If you followed Phil's talk, amazing. Thank you. If you followed Phil's talk earlier today, he talked a bit about this. I'm going to talk essentially about this paper that we released at Flashbots Research on like cross-domain MEV and the risk of centralization and all that stuff. And I'm Alex. I'm a researcher at Flashbots. All right. Briefly, what's the multi-chain world? It's a world of many domains, many layer ones, many layer twos, bridges, which are also domains, sidechains, etc. It's a world where the same apps are redeployed on each of these domains. So you have versions of Uniswaps on each domains, which we can see today. Uniswap is on many layer twos, same thing for Aave and SushiSwap and whatever. And it's the world of different security. So the security that a layer 2 has can differ depending on what type of layer 2 and its architecture. And so to some extent, we have to think about different security models. Right. So immediately, what we realize when you think about this is there's a fragmentation of liquidity. So if we think of that example with Uniswap, you have liquidity that's split in each of these pools, in each of these domains, and it's not linked, at least not today. It's a fragmentation of security assumptions across different bridges, but also across these different domains, and different asset representations as well, right? So you have Ethereum layer 1 that people see as the canonical ETH, but you also have RBETH, OptiETH, HopETH if you're using the Hop bridge, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So again, immediately, these are new sources of inefficiencies from the lack of standards and the nascent markets there, where winning designs are still emerging for what are like the proper security models you should adopt, and also the proper standards for how RBETH should interact with OptiETH, and whether users should even know that there's a difference there. And ultimately, that's new sources of MEV, right? Because they're inefficiencies. So let's briefly go through an example, and you're going to get why it makes sense soon. So we want to execute an arbitrage across Arbitrum and Optimism that you can see here. And we start with DAI on Ethereum. You can see that we want to buy ETH at the 300 price. We want to sell it at the 400 price, right? That makes sense. Arbitrage, great. So we want to do this fast. So how fast can we go, right? So in our first try, we can try to do it as trustless as possible. And using the native bridges, we start with DAI. We bridge it to Arbitrum, where we execute our swap. So we buy with our DAI a bunch of ETH. Then we withdraw that ETH, and we wait the 7-week dispute resolution period. Then we port that ETH to Optimism. We execute the swap from ETH to DAI. And then we withdraw that DAI back to Ethereum, again, waiting the 7-week dispute resolution period. So this takes about like 2 weeks and 10 minutes. It's obviously too long. So can we go any faster? Yes, we can. We can use non-native bridges. In that case, you don't have to wait the 7-week dispute resolution period, because someone is going to take that risk for you, either by running fraud provers or by being happy just lending you money for some interest rate. And so depending on how fast the bridges we're using, this is now reduced to 25 minutes, which is great, yay. However, there might be like a faster way to do this. And you have to think about how fast you can do this, because if you're not the fastest, you're going to lose this opportunity to someone else who's going to seize it. This is capacity constrained, so this opportunity will be brought itself back to like efficient prices when someone seizes it and fills it at its maximum capacity. So the third try is we don't even bridge, right? We just have assets on each of these domains, and we just execute both trades relatively simultaneously. In that case, we're now at like a few seconds instead of 25 minutes or blah, blah, blah. And these other tries are like pretty much irrelevant, just because anyone who has these assets on each of these domains are just winning every time. And so the other people that are here, like in try 1 and try 2, just are losing their time in doing this. And by the time they arrive, the opportunity is gone already. The prices have moved. So what do we learn from this, right? We learned that in this new world, to seize a lot of these type of opportunities, you have pretty high capital requirements. And this is a difference from the current kind of Ethereum DeFi landscape. You also learned that what we didn't talk about is when you do this like try 3, sure, you can do a trade on each of these domains, but then you end up with different assets on each of these domains. In one place you have more DAI, in one place you have more ETH. You need to somehow rebalance this inventory, because you want to make sure that the assets that are sitting idled on these domains can be used in the most optimal way. And so you want to make sure you have the optimal composition of assets. And that's very close to what market makers do, called inventory management. The other thing is there's the reintroduction of legging risks, which didn't exist for a lot of atomic arbitrage, right? Where you have these two legs of your trade, and even though you can execute them relatively simultaneously, there's still risk that the price is going to move against you, or that there's even issues with one domain against the other, similar to the legging risk that you have between centralized exchanges. So we can extend this logic to like think about this cross-domain world, right? Where we have this asynchronous world, where the most well-capitalized players are the fastest, and where others rely on short-term lenders, so bridges, or, there's different bridges designed, but a lot of them just lend you capital in order to move fast between domains. So it's a bit sad because this amplifies wealth inequality, right? Like the people that have a lot of capital can afford to seize these opportunities, and the ones who don't really have access to them. And also to more centralized and trusted infrastructure. So if you want to move fast between domains, you need to use these kind of like trusted bridges, because right now there isn't like a good solution to move in like a latency minimized way between domains without trusting a third party. And I'm going to talk about that more. So why all of this is relevant is, well, this isn't great, right? This is not very positive, but there's more. So is there an even better way to do this, right? Because again, as traders, we're in the ever pursuit of like more alpha, and so we want to know if there's a way to be even more efficient in this trade, right? So we started asking ourselves, what if you control the order of both optimism and arbitrum? So let's take domains A and B instead, because it's a little simpler. And we kind of evaluated, if you control, so this is what this inequality stands for, if you control the ordering of both A and B versus if you control the ordering of only A plus the ordering of only B. So you can think of a sequencer of A, sequencer of B, and sequencer that controls both A and B. And we try to reason whether this inequality is true. Why is this worrying is because if this inequality is true, there's a non-zero financial incentive for the sequencers of A and B who might otherwise just care about their own domains. There's an incentive for them to collude. They make more money by colluding than by just caring about their own chain, right? And that's problematic. So whether this inequality holds true all the time is difficult to say. Intuitively, it does hold true for a lot of cases. For the case of arbitrage, it holds true, but it's a little more complicated. I won't get into it now. But there are a lot of opportunities that are conditional on the state of other domains. And so you can imagine that they can be sequencer collusion. So this is relatively worrying. And so, as domain designers, protocol designers in this room, you should start wondering like whether your nice design that's been like thought about in a vacuum actually makes sense when you like consider this, right? Like, do validator behaviors on your chain or your protocol changes? Is there a centralization of the validator set between parties that can collude more easily than others? Who will participate in validation in that case, given the privileges that they have? These are all relevant questions that you should think about as a domain designer. But wait, there's still more. How do these sequencers trust each other, right? So let's go back. We said sequencers can collude with one another, maybe to make more money. How can they do so? They have to communicate somehow the order of transactions to one another. They have to split the profit at the end. All of this is an economic cost, right? In a like permissionless system, and if these parties don't trust each other, there's like some overhead in being able to communicate in a relatively trustless fashion and coordinate. And so you can think about that cost in a more formal way, and we use a result in the paper from another paper from Mustafa Al-Bassam called SOK, Communication Across Distributed Ledgers, where an impossibility result is shown there that cross-ledger communication cannot happen without either a trusted third party or synchrony assumption beyond asynchrony. In our case, because it's a latency-sensitive application, you probably want to go with trusted third party because you don't want to have this synchrony assumption for this coordination between sequencers because it's time-sensitive. So we've now established there's a cost to sequencers coordinating with one another, colluding, collaborating. One way to reduce this coordination communication cost is just to be the sequencer in both places, right? If you own the validators in both places, you still have a communication cost, but it's your internal communication cost of communicating information rather than this like more complex like adversarial environment. And so why is that worrying? Well, it's worrying because this is a clear incentive for the centralization of validator set. In particular, for two chains, there's clearly this pressure for the validator sets to overlap more and more over time. That's extremely dystopian, right? We're talking about a future where like the same validators that are very large and capturing all of MEV, a lot of MEV, control most chains or validate most chains and have control over the ordering of most chains. And there's an economic incentive for that to happen right now. This is like what we talk about in the paper. So is the multi-chain world centralized? Well, not yet, right? At least not as far as I know. But it's coming though. The incentives are set this way right now. And so we should start thinking about what to do about it. Right, so what can we do? Should we cancel multi-chain? Should we I don't know, do something else? I don't think we can. I mean, we're too far ahead in that process. We have a lot of projects that have raised hundreds of millions of dollars to provide layer 2s, and they're gonna subsidize activity on their chain domains for a while. Most importantly, we need it for scaling, right? The reason we're going this multi-chain asynchronous world is because it is really architecturally a choice to have higher throughput, higher bandwidth, and generally being able to reach mass adoption. So there's a trade-off there by canceling multi-chain, whatever that means. Right. So two things that we can maybe do. The first one is for people in this room and people attending this conference and also people watching later or now, we should think about this more. Domain designers should think about the incentives that are exerted on their systems from these other chains, right? We talked about chains cannibalizing one another, or reorgs of the weaker chains and that type of stuff, or these type of double spend attacks you can do between different bridges. This is all relevant in this context. Validator companies running on many networks, which is already the case today, should be aware of the risks of their infrastructure being used to do this cross-domain collusion in a trusted fashion in their own system. Users should pay attention as well in the systems they use, the security assumptions they subject themselves to. And most importantly, why we should be aware of all of this is because before a real solution emerges, it's likely that a lot of these centralization vectors might also be regulated by social norms. So it'll be about people choosing no, we don't do this because it's frowned upon. No, we don't do this because we understand that there's a risk involved in doing that. And so we want to be able to enforce these social norms, create them, and social norms are created with some level of awareness, especially in crypto. So awareness, number one. Number two, to do more research, right? So the paper that we released is a work in progress. You can check it out online, but there's a lot of measurement that still needs to be done. There's a lot of assumptions that need to be checked and double-checked. And also, to some extent, it's a prediction about the future rather than an observation of what the current system looks like. And so that's different, for example, from Flashboys 2.0. Whether it was somehow a prediction, but as soon as they launched bots, they could see this bot ecosystem emerging. In this case, this is more predicting what this might look like, looking at where the incentives are going. So a few research topics there. The cross-chain, MEV-motivated reorgs, that's a scary one. Potentially standardization of assets and of bridges, because the more standardization you have, the easier it is to reason about the security and incentives of these systems as they are composed with one another. How far can we reduce the communication/coordination costs for cross-domain collusion? This is also a big question, right? If the delta between this person owning many validators at once versus the validators on different domains coordinating with one another is small in the communication overhead, that other solution that preserves the decentralization of the validator set might be preferred because the delta is small enough and it's a cost that's willing to be paid, and ultimately it's more socially scalable. And there's a bunch of other questions in the paper, and you should work with us on it. You should ask us about it. You should question it. You should criticize it, and all of these things to get us together closer to the truth. Yeah, and that's it. 14 minutes. Nice. Any questions? I think we have 4 minutes? 5 minutes? Otherwise, you can read the paper, you can reach out at these things, you can find me at the event today. I'm happy to chat, explain any of this more. And there's a question here.
Hey, thanks for the talk. So you presented the second try and the third one, where you can lend out from short-term lenders. But wouldn't those be the ones that are actually doing the arbitrage on try 3?
Absolutely. So yeah, the bridges who hold liquidity in many places would be the acting as these kind of market makers. They also do inventory management as well. And yeah, the capital they would be lending you, they have more information about the state of the world than you do, and they also have capital in these different domains, so they would be arbing you, right? Similar to how 1inch is taking positive slippage on their users.
Hey. Oh.
Oh, hey, Lakshman.
Hey, Alex. So you talked about, and this is pretty scary, that there's a force pushing validators to kind of like be all securing all the chains. Is there anyone doing any work into sort of like the cost in the other direction, like due to the economics of like validating on different chains being different? Is it costly to be? Is it not cost effective to be competitive on many different chains at the same time with the same infrastructure or something like that?
I don't know. I remember asking the question a while ago on Twitter, and I got like a few different answers. I will also say like there's another tension, which is if there's a single party, like at the most dystopian T infinity, a single party validating all chains, the system is very prone to regulatory capture. It's very prone to censorship. And ultimately, it's not a system that users would want to use. So over time, they might switch to a system that affords them the guarantees that they would like, right? So there's like a tension between the two. But I think the fact that the incentives are set up in such a way that this can happen currently for economically rational actors, which I think is like the minimum we can assume for players in like permissionless, decentralized, pseudonymous systems, is problematic. So maybe we can like shift the incentives in a way that the validator sets can hopefully stay decentralized.
I have a more fundamental question. How do you even track these multi-chain ARBs happening?
Right, so that's one question in the paper, right? It's very difficult. When it was like on a single chain, it's much easier to quantify, and we've released open source code on how to quantify MEV within Ethereum, and we've released dashboards on it. In this case, it's a little bit more complicated, especially because to some extent the quantification is also subjective. It's also based on a global fair price that the market maker would have and how they trade these assets and the amount of risk that you discount these assets by. So it gets a little bit more complicated, but there's definitely a lot of intuition that it's a very large size. We also know of existing players that have this type of behavior, for example, across centralized and decentralized exchanges already. This alludes to something that Phil referred to, where even if Ethereum is extremely centralized, if there's like a chain with more value in it, that's very centralized, that is going to exert a centralizing pressure on Ethereum. And this is where you start thinking about this like dynamical system of many domains actually interacting with one another. And this is where like designing your system in a vacuum becomes more dangerous, in my opinion. So hopefully we can start the conversation on like how to think about composing different systems together, even if you think your system is going to win everything. All right.
All right, thank you for the questions. We have to move on
Thank
to
you
the
for
next
questions.
speakers.
Thank you for